Stand up. Hands where I can see them.
I called this in. I'm a certified first responder. She needs compression or she will.
Step away from her.
If I let go, she bleeds. I'm not the driver.
A man witnesses a car accident on his way home from work. He pulls over. He calls 911. He gets out of his car, goes to the injured driver, and applies compression bandaging to a bleeding wound while he waits for help to arrive. A police officer arrives. He looks at the scene. He looks at the black man crouched over the injured woman with blood on his hands. He arrests him. Kofi Mensah is 39 years old, high school biology teacher at Jefferson High School, where he has taught for 14 years. Certified first responder volunteer with the city's Community Emergency Response Team for 11 years. The kind of person who took the certification course because he believed that knowing what to do in the first 4 minutes of an emergency was a civic obligation, and who has deployed that knowledge in 3 prior incidents over 11 years: a kitchen fire, a child's allergic reaction at a school fair, and a cyclist struck by a car on Riverside Drive 2 summers ago. The kind of person who, when he sees a car accident in his rearview mirror, does not drive past it. Officer Dale Pruitt is 32 years old, 5 years on the force. He arrives at the intersection of Cedar Mill Road and 5th Avenue at 6:14 p.m., 4 minutes after Kofi's 911 call. He sees a 2-car collision. He sees a gray sedan with front-end damage against a stopped light pole. He sees a blue hatchback with rear quarter panel damage stopped in the intersection. He sees an injured woman on the ground beside the blue hatchback. He sees a black man crouched over her with blood on his hands. He does not look at the gray sedan. He does not speak to the 3 witnesses on the sidewalk who are already shouting information at him. He does not check the 911 call log on his radio, which would have shown Kofi's call placed 4 minutes and 11 seconds before Pruitt's arrival. He does not ask the injured woman, who is conscious, what happened. He asks the black man with blood on his hands to stand up. And when Kofi stands up and tries to explain, Pruitt hears the explanation of a man he has already decided is a suspect, rather than the account of a witness he has not yet questioned. The handcuffs go on at 6:17 p.m. The ambulance arrives at 6:19 p.m. The paramedics find the injured driver, 44-year-old Patricia Walsh, with an unsecured compression bandage on her left forearm, bleeding resuming, asking the paramedic where the man who was helping her went. Kofi Mensah is in the patrol vehicle when Patricia Walsh asks that question. He will be in a holding cell 6 minutes later. He will be there for 6 hours and 40 minutes. Type 4 minutes if you understand what it means that his 911 call came in before the officer even left the precinct. This story proves that in America, a black man can stop at an accident he did not cause, call 911, administer first aid to an injured stranger, and still end up in handcuffs, because the officer who arrived looked at the scene and decided, before asking a single question, that the black man with blood on his hands was the explanation for everything wrong in front of him. Kofi Mensah grew up in the North Side neighborhood of the city, the eldest of 2 children born to a Ghanaian immigrant father who worked as a hospital orderly for 26 years and an American-born mother who taught 3rd grade at the same elementary school for 19 years. His household had a specific relationship with public service that was not discussed as a value so much as demonstrated as a practice. His father brought home stories about the patients whose rooms he cleaned and whose families he spoke to in the hallways when the nurses were occupied. His mother stayed late twice a week to tutor the students whose parents worked evening shifts. Neither of them described what they did as going above and beyond. They described it as the job. Kofi absorbed that framing entirely. He was not a person who thought of helpfulness as a choice that required deliberation. It was a reflex shaped by 14 years of watching 2 people treat the care of others as the baseline expectation of a day well spent. He studied biology at the State University on an academic scholarship, graduated with honors, completed his teaching certification, and joined the faculty at Jefferson High School at 25. In 14 years, he has taught approximately 1,600 students the mechanics of living systems, how cells communicate, how blood circulates, how the body responds to trauma and stress and infection. He is the teacher whose students come back to visit. He is the teacher whose former students, now adults with children of their own, describe him when asked about the person who made them feel like science was something that belonged to them. At 28, he completed the Community Emergency Response Team certification course offered by the city's Emergency Management Office. He did it because his father had told him, once, about watching a man collapse in a hospital corridor and not knowing what to do while he waited for medical staff to arrive. His father said, "I stood there feeling useless in a building full of medical equipment because nobody had ever shown me what to do with my hands in those 2 minutes." Kofi registered for the course the following week. 11 years later, he has deployed his certification 3 times. A kitchen fire in his apartment building, where he evacuated 2 elderly residents and contained a secondary ignition point before the fire department arrived. A severe allergic reaction at a school fair, where he administered epinephrine from a student's EpiPen and maintained her airway for 4 minutes until the ambulance arrived. A cyclist struck by a car on Riverside Drive, where he applied compression to a femoral bleed and kept the man conscious through conversation for 6 minutes until the paramedics took over. He did not make any of those interventions because he was required to. He made them because he was there and he knew what to do, and not doing it was not something his particular formation of conscience would allow. On the evening of November 8th, he is driving home from Jefferson High School, where he has spent the afternoon supervising a student science fair and grading the last of his junior class's lab reports. He is on Cedar Mill Road at 6:10 p.m., approximately 3 car lengths behind a blue hatchback, stopped at the intersection of Cedar Mill and 5th Avenue, when a gray sedan traveling on 5th Avenue runs the red light at approximately 40 miles per hour and strikes the hatchback's rear quarter panel, spinning it into the intersection and coming to rest against the light pole on the northwest corner. Kofi stops his car. He calls 911 at 6:10 p.m. and 14 seconds. He gets out. He approaches the hatchback. The driver, Patricia Walsh, 44 years old, a middle school librarian on her way to pick up her daughter from soccer practice, is conscious but disoriented, with a significant laceration on her left forearm from the window glass and a head wound that is bleeding into her left eye. She is trying to open her door. Kofi tells her to stay still. He retrieves the first aid kit he keeps in his back seat, the same kit he has carried since completing his CERT certification 11 years ago, and begins compression bandaging on her forearm. He is in that position, crouched beside Patricia Walsh, with both hands applying pressure to her forearm, when Officer Dale Pruitt's patrol vehicle arrives at the intersection at 6:14 p.m. Dale Pruitt has been with the city police department for 5 years. He grew up 40 minutes outside the city, joined the force at 27 after 2 years working loss prevention at a retail chain, and has generated 2 prior complaints in 5 years, both from black individuals, both alleging that Pruitt made determinations about their involvement in incidents before gathering basic information. Both complaints were reviewed internally. Both were dismissed. His preparation for the scene at Cedar Mill and 5th Avenue consists of a dispatch call describing a 2-vehicle collision with possible injuries. He arrives to find exactly that: 2 damaged vehicles, an injured person on the ground, a man with blood on his hands. He does not check the 911 call log. He does not approach the gray sedan, whose driver, 31-year-old Nathan Briggs, whose blood alcohol level will later be measured at 0.12, is sitting in the driver's seat. He does not speak to Carol Hayes, who is standing on the sidewalk 8 feet from the scene and who has been at the intersection since before the collision occurred and saw the entire thing. He does not speak to the 2 other witnesses, a delivery driver named Marcus Webb, who stopped his truck when he saw the collision, and a woman named Diane Carter, who came out of the dry cleaner on the corner when she heard the impact. All 3 witnesses are present, visible, and attempting to provide information when Pruitt arrives. He approaches Kofi. In his incident report, filed at 8:47 p.m., Pruitt will describe his reasoning as follows. The subject was observed in physical contact with the injured party at the scene of a collision, with blood visible on the subject's hands and clothing, and the subject's vehicle was positioned at the scene in a manner consistent with involvement in the collision. He will identify Kofi's car, stop 3 car lengths behind the hatchback, engine off, hazard lights on, as the vehicle he believed to be involved. He will be asked, in his departmental review, to explain what specific feature of a car stopped 3 car lengths behind the hatchback, with its hazard lights running, suggested involvement in a collision between 2 other vehicles. He will not produce a satisfactory answer. He will be asked whether he spoke to any of the 3 witnesses before making the arrest. He will say he secured the scene first. He will be asked what securing the scene means when the only action taken was arresting the man performing first aid on the injured driver. He will not answer that question directly in any of the 4 proceedings in which it is asked. He will not be asked, in the departmental review, why he did not check the 911 call log. The departmental review does not think to ask. Attorney Renee Caldwell, retained 8 weeks later, will spend 47 minutes on that question in Pruitt's deposition. She will have the answer from the dispatch records before she asks the first question. She will ask it anyway, for the record. The ambulance arrives at 6:19 p.m., 2 minutes and 40 seconds after Kofi is placed in the patrol vehicle. The paramedics find Patricia Walsh with a partially secured compression bandage on her left forearm. The compression has been interrupted. The bleeding has resumed. The paramedic who takes over the wound management notes in his report that the bandaging that had been applied prior to his arrival was correctly positioned and effectively applied, and that the interruption of compression was the primary cause of the resumed bleeding he manages on arrival. Patricia Walsh is transported to Mercy General Hospital. She is treated for a forearm laceration requiring 14 stitches, a 2-centimeter scalp wound, and a mild concussion. She is kept overnight for observation. She is discharged the following afternoon. In the ambulance on the way to Mercy General, she asks the paramedic what happened to the man who was helping her. The paramedic does not know who she means. She describes him: black man, medium height, calm voice, told her to stay still and keep her eyes on him, applied something to her arm that made the pain less immediate. She says he talked to her the whole time. She says he told her his name was Kofi. The paramedic does not know where Kofi is. Nobody at the hospital knows where Kofi is. Patricia Walsh asks 3 more times over the course of her admission, the intake nurse, the attending physician, and the floor nurse on the overnight shift. None of them can tell her. She asks her husband when he arrives at the hospital to find out what happened to the man named Kofi who stopped to help her. Her husband calls the police department the following morning. He is told the investigation is ongoing. He asks whether anyone named Kofi was at the scene. He is told he cannot be given information about individuals involved in an active investigation. He tells the person on the phone that his wife is asking about the man who helped her and that she wants to thank him. He is told to call back. He calls back 4 times over the following week. On the 4th call, he is told that a man was detained at the scene and subsequently released. He asks for a name. He is not given one. Patricia Walsh finds out what happened to Kofi Mensah 6 weeks after the accident, when the lawsuit is filed, and her husband sees Kofi's name in a news report about the case. She calls Attorney Caldwell's office that afternoon. She says she wants to help. Kofi Mensah is processed at the precinct at 6:47 p.m. His hands are still marked with Patricia Walsh's blood when the processing officer photographs him. He asks twice during processing whether anyone has checked the 911 call log from the scene. He is told the investigation is ongoing. He asks whether the witnesses at the scene have been interviewed. He is told the investigation is ongoing. He asks whether the driver of the gray sedan has been tested for impairment. He is told the investigation is ongoing. He is placed in a holding cell at 7:15 p.m. He calls his wife, Abina, at 7:30 p.m. He tells her what has happened in the specific and precise way that a man who has spent 14 years teaching tells things. Sequence, evidence, the gap between what is true and what is currently being treated as true, and what he believes will close that gap when it is examined. He tells her to call Raymond, his brother-in-law, who is a paralegal at a civil rights firm and will know who to call. Raymond calls attorney Renee Caldwell at 8 p.m. She is familiar with the name Dale Pruitt. She has 2 other clients with pending complaints against him. She tells Raymond she will be at the precinct within the hour. She arrives at 9:15 p.m. She reviews the incident report. She requests the 911 call log from the scene. She is told it is not yet available. She requests the body camera footage. She is told it is under review. She asks whether the at-fault driver, Nathan Briggs, whose gray sedan ran the red light, has been tested for impairment. She is told he was tested at the scene. She asks for the result. The desk officer pauses. The blood alcohol reading of .12 is in the system. The desk officer provides it. She asks why Nathan Briggs is not in a holding cell. The desk officer does not have an answer. She files an emergency motion for release at 9:45 p.m. It is denied. She files a second motion at 11 p.m., attaching a transcript of Kofi's 911 call, which Raymond has obtained through an emergency records request to the city's 911 dispatch office. The transcript shows Kofi's call placed at 6:10 p.m. and 14 seconds, describing the collision, identifying himself by name, and stating that he is a certified first responder who is stopped to assist the injured driver. The motion is denied. The duty magistrate notes that the transcript does not conclusively establish that the individual who placed the call is the same individual in custody. Kofi Mensah is released at 1:02 a.m. He has been in the holding cell for 5 hours and 47 minutes and in custody for a total of 6 hours and 40 minutes. His hands are clean by the time he leaves. Patricia Walsh's blood has been washed off. The first aid kit from his back seat has been logged as evidence. He walks out of the precinct to find Abina, Raymond, and Attorney Caldwell waiting on the front steps. Abina puts both arms around him and does not say anything. He holds on. Then he steps back and asks Caldwell, "What do we do now?" She says, "We file." Nathan Briggs, the driver of the gray sedan, is given a field sobriety test at the scene by a second officer, Sergeant Maria Delgado, who arrives 8 minutes after Pruitt. He fails the sobriety test. He is administered a breathalyzer. His blood alcohol content is .12, 50% above the legal limit. He is cited for driving under the influence and running a red light. He is not arrested. He is not taken to the precinct. He is issued citations at the scene and released to his wife, who arrives at 6:58 p.m. to drive him home. At the time Nathan Briggs is released to his wife, Kofi Mensah has been in custody for 41 minutes. This sequence, the drunk driver who caused the accident released at the scene, the Good Samaritan who stopped to help transported to a holding cell, is documented in Sergeant Delgado's own incident report, in the dispatch records, in the citation log, and on Pruitt's body camera. It is not a contested fact in any of the proceedings that follow. It is simply what happened. Attorney Caldwell will describe it to the jury in her opening statement in 11 words. The man who caused it went home. The man who helped went to jail. She will then sit down. She will let the jury do the arithmetic. The morning after Kofi's release, Abina Mensah posts a 5-paragraph account of what happened on her personal social media page. She is not a public figure. She has 400 followers. By noon, the post has been shared 11,000 times. By the following morning, it has been shared 240,000 times. A local news station contacts Attorney Caldwell. A national outlet contacts her 40 minutes later. The city's police department initiates an internal affairs review at 2 p.m. the day after the arrest, which is 4 hours after the social media post begins circulating and 8 hours before the national outlet runs its story. The timing of the internal affairs review initiation is noted in the civil complaint. The internal affairs review accesses Pruitt's body camera footage, the 911 call log showing Kofi's call placed 4 minutes and 11 seconds before Pruitt's arrival, the dispatch record showing 3 witnesses at the scene, Pruitt's incident report, Sergeant Delgado's incident report, the citation log showing Nathan Briggs cited and released, Nathan Briggs' blood alcohol reading, and the statements of all 3 witnesses, Carol Hayes, Marcus Webb, and Diane Carter, all of whom describe the same sequence of events and all of whom identify Kofi Mensah as the person who stopped, called 911, and administered first aid. The Internal Affairs Review also accesses Pruitt's prior complaint record, 2 complaints, both from black individuals, both alleging premature determination of involvement before evidence gathering. Both dismissed. The review is completed in 9 days. Its findings are unambiguous on every material question. Pruitt's arrest of Kofi Mensah was not supported by the available evidence at the time it was made. The available evidence, had it been gathered before the arrest, would have indicated Kofi Mensah as a witness and first responder rather than a subject. The incident report filed by Pruitt contains characterizations of the scene, specifically the description of Kofi's vehicle as positioned in a manner consistent with involvement in the collision, that are contradicted by the body camera footage showing the vehicle stopped with hazard lights running 3 car lengths behind the point of impact. The review recommends termination. The department's disciplinary board accepts the recommendation. Pruitt is terminated 14 days after the arrest. He is also, as of the morning of his termination, under criminal investigation by the DA's office for filing a false incident report. Attorney Caldwell files the civil lawsuit 6 weeks after the arrest. It names Officer Dale Pruitt, the city, and the police department. The total demand is $11.2 million. 2 days after the filing, Patricia Walsh calls Caldwell's office. Caldwell takes the call herself. Patricia Walsh says she has been trying to find out what happened to the man who helped her since the night of the accident. She says she did not know his name until she saw the news report. She says she wants to provide a statement. She says she wants to testify if it would help. Caldwell asks her to describe what she remembers from the scene. Patricia Walsh describes it in precise detail. The impact, the disorientation, the door that would not open, the voice that told her to stay still. She describes Kofi's hands applying pressure to her arm. She describes him talking to her about her daughter's soccer practice, which she had mentioned, about the biology of wound pressure, which he explained to her in terms she found both clinical and oddly calming. She describes the moment the pressure stopped and she heard voices and looked up and saw the officer and saw Kofi being pulled to his feet in handcuffs. She says, "I asked where he was going. Nobody answered me. I kept asking. Nobody knew." Caldwell asks whether she would be willing to testify at trial. Patricia Walsh says she has been waiting 6 weeks for someone to ask her that question. The evidentiary record assembled by Attorney Caldwell is built around 5 categories of documentation that together produce one of the most comprehensive wrongful arrest cases the city's courts have processed. Pruitt's body camera footage becomes Exhibit A. It shows, in sequence, Pruitt's arrival at 6:14 p.m., Pruitt's approach to Kofi rather than to the gray sedan, the witnesses, or the at-fault driver, Kofi's immediate identification of himself and his role, Carol Hayes shouting from the sidewalk that he did not cause the accident, the handcuffing, and the ambulance arriving 2 minutes and 40 seconds after Kofi is in the patrol vehicle. The footage does not show Pruitt approaching Nathan Briggs. It does not show Pruitt speaking to any of the 3 witnesses before making the arrest. It does not show Pruitt checking his radio for the 911 call log. The 911 call record becomes Exhibit B. Kofi's call placed at 6:10 p.m. and 14 seconds. The call describes the collision. It identifies Kofi as a certified first responder who has stopped to assist. It precedes Pruitt's dispatch by 3 minutes and 40 seconds. The jury will hear the call played in full. It is 1 minute and 12 seconds long. Kofi's voice is calm throughout. He gives the intersection, describes the vehicles, estimates the injured driver's condition, and tells the dispatcher he is applying compression bandaging. He does not sound like a man who has just caused a 2-car collision. The witness statements from Carol Hayes, Marcus Webb, and Diane Carter become Exhibit C. All 3 witnessed the collision. All 3 saw Kofi stop, call 911, and go to Patricia Walsh. All 3 attempted to provide this information to Pruitt before the arrest. All 3 were told to step back. Nathan Briggs's citation record and blood alcohol documentation become Exhibit D. Point 1.2 Blood alcohol. Red light violation. Released to his wife at 6:58 p.m. while Kofi Mensah is in a holding cell. The arithmetic of this sequence, presented to the jury as a simple timeline, is, by Caldwell's assessment, the most powerful single exhibit in the case. Pruitt's prior complaint record and the department's dismissal documentation become Exhibit E. 2 complaints, both black subjects, both alleging premature arrest determination, both dismissed. The independent pattern analyst retained by Caldwell reviews 30 months of Pruitt's stop and arrest records. In stops involving black individuals at incident scenes, Pruitt's average time between arrival and first physical contact with a black individual present, 43 seconds. In stops involving white individuals at comparable scenes, 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Patricia Walsh testifies on day 4 of the civil trial. She is 44 years old, a middle school librarian, and she has never testified in a courtroom before. She is not nervous. She has been waiting 7 months to say what she has to say. Attorney Caldwell asks her to describe what she remembers from the moment of the collision to the moment the ambulance arrived. Patricia Walsh describes it in the same precise detail she provided in her initial statement, adding the specific sensory memories that 7 months of reflection have not dimmed. The sound of the impact, the smell of the deployed airbag, the specific timbre of Kofi's voice telling her to keep her eyes on him and stay still. She describes his hands. She says, "He held my arm the entire time. He did not let go. He talked to me about my daughter's soccer game and about how blood pressure works and about why staying calm was the most useful thing I could do for my own healing." She says, "I have never had a stranger take that much care with me. I have never had anyone make me feel that safe in a moment that was that frightening." Caldwell asks her what happened when the officer arrived. Patricia Walsh describes seeing Kofi pulled to his feet. She describes the handcuffs. She describes calling out. She says she tried to say that he was helping her, that he had not caused the accident, that he was the one who called for help. She says she does not know if anyone heard her. She says Kofi looked back at her as he was walked to the patrol vehicle. She says he was still trying to make sure someone had taken over holding her arm. Caldwell asks her one final question. In your assessment, what would have happened to you if Kofi Mensah had not stopped? Patricia Walsh is quiet for a moment. Then she says, "I was losing a significant amount of blood from my forearm. The paramedics arrived 9 minutes after the collision. Kofi applied compression approximately 2 minutes after the collision. Without that compression, in the 7 minutes before the paramedics arrived, I would have continued bleeding." She pauses. She says, "I asked my doctor at my follow-up appointment what the forearm laceration would have looked like without compression for 7 minutes. She says, "I am not going to describe his answer in detail, but I will say that I am glad Kofi Mensah did not drive past me that evening." The courtroom is quiet for 8 seconds after she finishes. The court reporter's transcript notes it. The deposition of Dale Pruitt takes place 9 months after the arrest. Attorney Caldwell conducts it for 5 hours. She asks him to describe the specific observation that led him to identify Kofi Mensah as a subject rather than a witness. He says the subject was in physical contact with the injured party, with blood visible on his hands and clothing. She asks whether physical contact with an injured person at an accident scene is, in his training, more consistent with causing the accident or with rendering assistance. He says it depends on the circumstances. She asks what specific circumstances at this scene indicated causation rather than assistance. He says the subject's vehicle was at the scene. She places the body camera still image on the table, showing Kofi's car stopped with hazard lights on, 3 car lengths behind the point of impact. She asks him to explain how that vehicle position is consistent with involvement in the collision. He does not answer. She asks whether he heard Carol Hayes identifying Kofi as the Good Samaritan before making the arrest. He says he heard a woman speaking, but could not verify the information in real time. She plays the body camera audio. Hayes's voice is clear. She asks him to confirm that the words she heard are the words Hayes says. He confirms it. She asks what verification would have been required to act on that information before making the arrest. He says he needed to secure the scene first. She asks him, for the 3rd time in the deposition, what securing the scene means when the only action taken was arresting the man performing first aid. He does not answer. She places the 911 call transcript on the table. She asks him to read the timestamp. He reads it, 6:10 p.m. and 14 seconds. She asks him to read the dispatch log showing his own departure from the precinct. He reads it, 6:10 p.m. and 51 seconds. She asks him to explain how a man who caused a collision could have placed a 911 call about that collision 37 seconds before the officer responding to that collision had even left the precinct. Pruitt is quiet for a long time. Caldwell lets the silence run for 31 seconds. Then she moves on. The civil jury deliberates for 1 day and 6 hours. They return a verdict for the plaintiff on all counts. $11.2 million. $4.3 million to Kofi Mensah. $1.8 million for civil rights violations, wrongful arrest, and racial profiling. $1.1 million for emotional distress and the specific and documented harm of being arrested, handcuffed, and held for 6 hours and 40 minutes for stopping to help an injured stranger. $1.4 million in punitive damages against Pruitt personally, reflecting the jury's specific finding that the arrest was made without any good faith examination of available evidence. $3.9 million to the estate of the case's systemic harm claim, structured to fund the implementation of the Good Samaritan Protection Protocol, a mandatory evidence-gathering sequence requiring any officer at a multi-vehicle incident scene to check the 911 call log, interview at least one witness, and approach all vehicles involved before initiating contact with any individual as a subject. $3 million in institutional punitive damages against the city, reflecting the 2 prior dismissed complaints, the absence of pattern review, and the department's failure to implement any accountability mechanism that would have interrupted Pruitt's conduct before November 8th. The criminal trial of Dale Pruitt, charged with filing a false official report and deprivation of civil rights under color of law, concludes 3 months after the civil verdict. The false characterization of Kofi's vehicle as positioned in a manner consistent with collision involvement, directly contradicted by Pruitt's own body camera footage, is the central exhibit. The jury deliberates for 11 hours. Guilty on both counts. Pruitt is sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. The 2 prior complainants, both black men whose dismissed complaints allege the same pattern of premature determination, are identified, contacted, and have their complaints formally reopened. Both are found meritorious. Both receive compensation from the city under a supplemental settlement. The $11.2 million Institutional Damages Fund, the development of what becomes within 18 months, the Good Samaritan Protection Act. State legislation sponsored by 2 legislators who cite Kofi Mensah's case by name in the bill's preamble, establishing legal protections for individuals who stop to render aid at accident scenes, and mandating a minimum evidence-gathering protocol before any such individual can be detained. The Act requires that any person who has placed a 911 call about an incident cannot be detained as a subject of that incident without independent corroborating evidence beyond their presence at the scene. That officers arriving at multi-vehicle scenes must interview at least one available witness before initiating contact with any individual as a subject. And that failure to follow the protocol is grounds for automatic disciplinary review if a subsequent investigation finds the detained individual was not involved in the incident. The act passes the state legislature unanimously. The governor signs it at a ceremony attended by Kofi Mensah, Patricia Walsh, and Carol Hayes, the witness who screamed from the sidewalk that he did not cause the accident and was told to step back. At the signing ceremony, Kofi is asked to say a few words. He talks for 90 seconds. He says he does not think of himself as the person this law is about. He says the law is about the next person who stops when they do not have to, who gets out of their car in a situation they did not create, who puts their hands on a stranger's wound and holds on until help arrives. He says, that person should not have to weigh the cost of stopping. Stopping should be free. This law makes it a little more free than it was before November 8th. He says, Patricia Walsh asked where I went. I want the next person who stops to be able to answer that question without a lawyer. $11.2 million. A 3-year federal sentence. a state law carrying his case's logic in its preamble. 2 prior complainants compensated for harms that a functional review process would have remedied years earlier. A mandatory protocol that creates a procedural interruption between an officer's arrival at a scene and the moment an assumption becomes a pair of handcuffs. And none of it returns the 6 hours and 40 minutes. None of it reaches the moment Pruitt stepped past Nathan Briggs' gray sedan without a glance and fixed on the black man crouched over an injured woman, and decided, in the 43 seconds his own data shows he averages between arrival and physical contact with a black individual at an incident scene, that he already understood what he was looking at. None of it erases the image Patricia Walsh describes. Kofi being walked to the patrol vehicle, still turning to look back at her, still trying to make sure someone had taken over, holding her arm. None of it addresses what it costs a person to stop doing the right thing in the middle of doing it, because an officer has decided, without a question asked, or a witness consulted, or a call log checked, that doing the right thing looks like guilt when the person doing it is black. The protocol makes the next scene harder to get wrong in the same way. The 43-second window becomes a mandatory sequence. The call log gets checked. The witnesses get asked. The at-fault vehicle gets approached. The evidence that was always there gets gathered before the handcuffs come out, rather than after. But the instinct, the thing that walked past a drunk driver at .12 and fixed on the man with blood on his hands before a single question was asked, that instinct is not in the protocol. It is in the space between what an officer sees and what an officer decides to examine. It is in the 37 seconds between Kofi's 911 call and Pruitt leaving the precinct that Pruitt never checked. It is in the 31 seconds of silence in the deposition room after Caldwell asked how a man could call 911 about a collision he caused before the responding officer had left the building. Pruitt did not answer that question. He could not. Because the honest answer, that he did not check, that it did not occur to him to check, that the scene in front of him had already resolved itself in his processing before the questions were asked, is the most important thing the Good Samaritan Protection Act was written to interrupt. Kofi Mensah still drives past that intersection approximately twice a week. He still has the first aid kit in his back seat. He bought a new one the week after he got the old one back from the evidence room. He still stops. Kofi Mensah is a high school biology teacher and 11-year certified first responder volunteer. He witnessed a collision, pulled over, called 911 4 minutes before the officer arrived, administered compression bandaging to an injured stranger, and was handcuffed in the middle of doing it. He was in a holding cell for 6 hours and 40 minutes. The man who caused the accident, blood alcohol .12, red light violation, went home to his wife while Kofi was being processed. Patricia Walsh asked where he went. Nobody could tell her for 6 weeks. Pruitt was terminated, convicted, and sentenced to 3 years. The Good Samaritan Protection Act is state law. Kofi still has a first aid kit in his back seat. So here is my question. If a 911 call placed before the officer left the precinct, 3 witnesses attempting to provide information at the scene, a drunk driver sitting in the at-fault vehicle 20 feet away, and a conscious injured woman who could have been asked what happened, are not enough to prevent a black man from being arrested for helping. What is? Should officers who bypass available evidence at incident scenes and arrest individuals later found to be rendering aid face automatic criminal referral rather than internal review, given that internal review has now demonstrably failed the same officer's subjects twice? And should the 2 supervisors who dismissed Pruitt's prior complaints without pattern analysis, complaints that describe the exact conduct that produced this arrest, face personal civil liability for the harm their dismissals made statistically predictable? Share your thoughts in the comments. This story proves that stopping to help is not protected by the fact of stopping to help. That a 911 call is not protection. That blood on your hands from someone else's wound is not self-explanatory. That 3 witnesses on a sidewalk saying your name is not enough if the officer arriving at the scene has already decided what he sees before he sees it. But a law that requires the call log to be checked, the witnesses to be asked, and the at-fault vehicle to be approached before the handcuffs come out. That law means the next person who stops does not have to calculate the cost of stopping. Kofi Mensah calculated it afterward. He said the answer was still yes. He still stops. That is what the 11.2 million was for. That is what the 3 years was for. That is what the law with his case in its preamble was for. So that stopping is free. Thank you for watching. I will see you in the next story.